and welcome to Unstress and the Summer Series for 2021. What a year 2020 has been, and we have curated some episodes which we think were particularly relevant to what has been going on. I hope you're having a great break, looking forward to the new year and catching up then. Until then, hope you enjoy this episode. Hello and welcome to Unstress. I'm Dr. Ron Ehrlich. Children's health, what a topic. I mean, one of the things we should be saying is that children are the canaries in the coal mine. So knowing how our kids are actually doing is, I think, a really important reflection on how we are doing as a society health-wise. And things are not, as you will hear in this episode, looking all that great. In fact, many of you may have heard the predictions that this generation of young people may be the first generation to not live as long as their parents. Now, that is a really disturbing prediction, to say the least. Whatever the story, we all have lessons to learn about our children's health, the causes and what to do about it. My guest today is Dr. Leila Masson. Now, Leila is an integrative medical practitioner. She's a specialist pediatrician. She's also happens to be a lactation specialist, and we'll talk about that as well. Leila has written a great book. It's called Children's Health A to Z. And apart from that, she's an educator of both health professionals and the public. Today, she shares some great insights with me. Now, in case you're wondering what the term integrative encompasses, an integrative approach looks at underlying causes, and the observations that Leila makes about children's health are just as applicable to us as adults, not just our children. And as a paediatrician and also a public health specialist, she's interested, as I think we all should be, in disease prevention through healthy nutrition and lifestyle. So remember, so many of the diseases we hear about are preventable, and according to the WHO, they involve nutritional and environmental and lifestyle issues. Leila is passionate about treating the whole child as well as supporting the whole family, and within her private practice, she also treats children on the autistic spectrum. She takes a holistic approach to behavioural and learning challenges, as well as allergies and a whole lot of other paediatric health problems. And also we'll touch on some issues around breastfeeding. I hope you enjoy this conversation I had with Dr. Leila Masson. Welcome to the show, Leila.
Thank you so much, Ron, for having me on your show.
Leila, we often, as a society, we congratulate ourselves on living longer, but our kids do reflect how healthy we really are as a society. What are some of the observations you've made as a paediatrician about children's health? How are we doing?
Well, it is true. Overall, we're living longer. But if you look at our children, there are actually more and more health problems, behavior problems, developmental problems coming up. The percentage of children with ADHD, with autism, allergies, even autoimmune disease is going up every single year. And we have to ask ourselves, why is that? You know, our genes haven't changed over the last 10, 20, 30 years. But our children really have in their health. If you talk to a teacher who has been teaching for quite a while, they always tell me, 20, 30 years ago, we maybe had one child per age group and 100 kids that had problems. And now we have 5 to 10 in a classroom who struggle to concentrate, struggle to learn, to get along with other children, all kinds of, or have allergies. We didn't used to have schools that needed to be nut-free, but now we do, and we really need to be very, very careful to protect the children who have allergies. But it is a sign of the times that things are not going so well. And I always like to think like a detective. What is the real cause for this? What's the reason, and what can we change? And I think there are a few things. First of all, we're not eating the kind of food anymore that we used to eat. Not that 30 years ago everybody ate a perfect diet, but children nowadays eat much more processed food. If you look at, not everyone, of course, there are children who live in families that are very aware and that are already switching to a more whole foods diet. But many children overall, if you look at them, all they eat really is a mixture of white flour, sugar, oil, and dairy. in different variations, as a breakfast cereal, as a white sandwich with some cheese, a pizza, some pasta with cheese, maybe a bit of tomato sauce on it, a donut, a cookie, a muffin. So it's not healthy. We need to eat real food, and number one is vegetables.
Yeah. I want to get on to the what we can be doing about it, but I just want to reflect on where we're at, because some of those, I mean, both you and I have been involved with the Mind Foundation over many years, and some of the statistics are quite frightening. I wonder if you might share some of those statistics with our, like I've heard the 1 in 3 allergies, 1 in 4 asthma. ADHD is a pretty big problem.
Yeah, up to 10% of children in Australia are diagnosed with ADHD. Allergies, we are the asthma capital of the world here. No other country has as much asthma amongst teenagers as we do. And children still die from asthma. It's really tragic. We also have now the statistics coming from the States that 1 in 38 children with autism.
Wow. Now, we did a program on this. I did a program on this about 5 years ago or 3 years ago, and it was 1 in 50 at that point, and it just seems to be getting worse and worse.
Yeah.
A lot of people say it's about diagnosis. People are being... What do you say to that?
Yeah. People looked into that,
Yes.
because at first, of course, everybody said it has to be just better picking up of children, more services available, so more people want to diagnose us. But the studies that have been done to look into it say clearly, yes, there is better diagnosis, earlier diagnosis. But there is also a real true increase. And most likely, even the CDC in America now says the biggest part of an autism diagnosis and the rise in the autism diagnosis is the environment. So it's toxins in the environment.
Yeah, wow. CDC is the Centre for Disease Control. Yes,
that's right.
That's right. Now, when people, there's another term that's come to mind for me, and when people hear the term pandas, they think of some cuddly bear in China. But as a paediatrician, it has a very different meaning to you. Tell me about PANDAS, pandas.
Yeah, I've just returned actually from the United States from a conference that had a whole day on pandas because it is increasing as well. It's one of those autoimmune diseases that are on the rise. So it stands for Pediatric Autoimmune Neurological Disease Associated with Streptococci.
Wow, okay.
So what happens with pandas is that a child gets a strep infection, so that's maybe a strep throat, and within a few weeks, very suddenly, their behavior changes. They become very anxious, very OCD, obsessive compulsive, and repetitive. And sometimes they also have tics. So they may have facial tics where their eyes blink, or maybe their whole arm moves. It's just unusual movements that they don't really have control over. They also very typically start wetting themselves again, which they didn't before. And it's usually in kids before they hit teenage years. So, the normal age around 8, 9, 10, 11, something like that.
Is this nighttime wetting?
No,
or
it's
just
daytime.
Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
Daytime, sometimes nighttime as well. But
so losing
typically
control
daytime,
of their bladder.
really. Absolutely. And their handwriting changes abruptly. So kids who were able to write quite nicely before, all of a sudden can't write. You can't barely read what they're writing anymore. So those are kind of some typical symptoms for that disease. And it is an autoimmune disease where your body tries to fight the strep infection by making antibodies. That's our immune system fighting the infection. And unfortunately, the antibodies also attack parts of the brain that for some reason look similar to the streptococci, to the bacteria on their surface. And so there's inflammation in the brain, and these children become, in a way, mentally ill, if you like that. I don't like that term, but, they really are very unwell. And some kids can't leave the home anymore. They have severe separation anxiety. They are very repetitive. They have to check 10 times that the oven is turned off and that everything is okay. They see things sometimes, And the amazing thing is you can treat it. You give these children, I do not like giving antibiotics, and we clearly have a problem in the whole developed world of using too many antibiotics. But in this case, I do use them because usually within 10 days, 2 weeks, the child is back to their normal self,
Wow.
their usual self. And so the antibiotics get rid of the strep, and then you really need to work on improving the immune system.
Yeah.
So making sure that their vitamin D level is fine, that they have enough zinc, that they're not eating foods that inflame the whole immune system any further.
Is the condition? I mean, is it a relatively new condition? Has it been around for a long time? Is it on the rise? I mean, what's the trends?
Well, it's probably been around for a long time, but not been diagnosed. So I don't know whether you've heard of rheumatic heart disease,
Sure.
which is exactly the same thing. But in that case, the antibodies that we produce against the strep don't attack the brain, but attack the heart. And so destroy actually part of the heart. And kids who have that, called rheumatic fever, they need to be on antibiotics until they are 21 years old, because there's such a high risk of a recurrence and further destruction of the heart valve that then if we don't want to take that risk, we keep them on antibiotics. And in rheumatic fever, some kids need actually a new valve. They need a heart valve replacement surgery, which is terrible.
Yeah.
There are also people who get, their kidneys get affected, glomerulonephritis after strep infection. So there are different ones. They've all been around for a long time. But I think Pandas is, and then there's one more called Sydenham's chorea.
Hang on. It's called
Sydenham's chorea.
Korea. Okay. Yep.
Where the kids make kind of weird movements of their whole body, their arms. They can't walk. They're really, it's very unusual. Also, sudden onset after streptococcal infection. So the Pandas is kind of the newest in the club. That's a diagnosis that hasn't really hit the mainstream yet. I mean, there is research at the National Institutes of Health in America. The research has been done for 25 years. And one of the big heroes of that is Sue Swedo, a pediatrician at NIH. And she's really brought this Pandas to the other doctors. Many still haven't heard of it, but it is a real illness, and there's a lot of research on it.
What is the incidence? What do they estimate? It's a difficult one to put on.
I actually don't know what the incidence is. It's I don't know that we even have statistics on that.
Yeah, but Pandas is one condition, but far more commonly, and you mentioned that Australia was the allergy capital of the world. Why do you think that is? What is it about Australia that makes us so special?
Well, it's a wonderful country. I love it.
Yes.
So for allergies, I think one thing is that, if you start, I always love to think, what is the best way of preparing a child for a healthy life? And you start before the birth, with the mother having good nutrition during the pregnancy, but also taking enough vitamin D. We know that there's a very high rate of vitamin D deficiency or insufficiency, where it's just not good enough, the vitamin D, even in Australia, our sunny country. So very important that the mother makes sure it gets enough vitamin D, enough folate, and sometimes, just a healthy diet. There are other supplements, like I always recommend probiotics in the pregnancy as well, to prepare her gut flora for the birth. Because we now know that the gut flora is really essential for your immune system. About 70 to 80% of our immune system sits in the gut. And it is controlled by the bacteria, the millions of bacteria that live in our gut. We have between 1 and 2 kilograms of bacteria that grow in our gut, and we couldn't live without them. They digest some of our food for us. They produce enzymes. They produce some vitamins. They even produce neurotransmitters. So it's really, there is an explosion of research into how the gut flora affects not just our immune system, but even our brain and behavior. But back to the immune system and allergies. So we want a good gut flora. We want that baby to be born naturally. And when the baby comes through the birth canal, it swallows the mom's gut flora. So we want that to be a good gut flora. Unfortunately, a lot of children are born by C-section. Some hospitals have a 25 to 30% C-section rate. And just yesterday, I saw a mom who had a baby in C-section. I said, tell me, why was the baby born by C-section? I'm always interested. And, of course, there are true emergencies. And I'm very glad that we have C-sections available because it does save lives. But in this case was... The doctor just thought the baby may be a bit too big for me, and I was a bit older. And so we just got the baby out 2 weeks early. So the problem with that is that this baby is not going to have a good gut flora. Babies who are born by C-section, their gut flora resembles the skin flora, so the bacteria that grow on the skin of the hospital workers.
Oh, wow.
So it's completely different.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that, of course, causes inflammation in the gut because that's not the kind of bacteria you're supposed to have in your gut. Then the next thing is that because that baby was born 2 weeks early and the mom's body wasn't ready to go into labor, she didn't produce breast milk. So this baby didn't get breast milk. Now, that's another big insult to the immune system.
Yeah.
We know that when babies are breastfed, first of all, it promotes a really good gut flora. There are special growth factors for bifidobacteria, which are the predominant bacteria in a baby's gut, in breast milk. So when you drink breast milk, you have a beautiful gut flora.
So there are some probiotics in gut flora. In breast milk.
There are also probiotics in breast milk. We used to think that breast milk was sterile, but it's not. So there are bacteria that go through the breast milk. But the babies has some bacteria in the gut, and then the breast milk promotes the growth of those nice bacteria, the ones we want. And also, the breast milk itself also has lots and lots of different growth factors for the immune system. So we know that children, the longer they're breastfed, the less likely they are to have allergies. And the recommendation is to breastfeed exclusively for 6 months. And that's really important. A lot of babies here start eating around 4 months, 4.5 months. And the babies are not ready. Their immune systems are not ready at that time to take food. They really should be getting only breast milk.
What about going back to the C-section, because it is so common? Would a vaginal swab and then introducing it into the oral cavity, does that sound too simple? Or
That's actually being done.
Right, okay, wow. But that would make sense. Or what should these 25% or 30% of women who are having C-sections, what should they be doing to compensate for that?
So first of all, a lot of hospitals do that now. They put a swab in the mother's vagina. And right after birth, they take that and swab around the mouth of the baby, or even swab the mom's nipples. And then when the baby starts breastfeeding, it gets some of that good flora. The other thing I always recommend is to give the baby probiotics. So we can buy probiotics that are made specifically for babies. And you get them as a powder. The mother can either just dip her finger in that and put the finger in the baby's mouth, or express a little bit of breast milk and mix a 1/4 teaspoon of those good probiotics into there and give it to the baby in a syringe or something like that. So
and
I
that
always
should
recommend
go on
that.
for how long?
Well, I would say the longer the better. You're only seeding. It's like giving little seeds of good bacteria to your baby. So you're not really completely changing the gut flora in a week or two. That's why I think it's a good idea to keep doing it for at least 2 months, 3 months. And then if the baby is perfectly fine, breastfed, has poos nicely, and has those nice breastfed poos that don't smell and have little curdles in them, then you can probably stop. It won't hurt, as far as we know, to give a little bit from time to time. And again, especially if the mom or the baby need antibiotics.
Yes.
So that's the other hit that we have against our gut flora, is that we have a lot of antibiotics. So some moms get antibiotics during the birth, especially if they get a C-section. Some get it after birth for whatever reason.
Is that given with the C-section as just a preventive measure in case of infection?
Yeah, because infection rate would be probably quite high if they didn't get the antibiotics, So, it's a huge operation.
Yes, I know. It's not a
little cut.
No. It's a major abdominal incision, and gosh, I know. My wife went through it. My daughter went through it as well. So I'm very familiar with that, and it's interesting to hear some of the challenges that come from it.
Yeah,
a lot less known. We didn't talk about it 30 years ago.
Well, definitely not. It was nobody was giving probiotics 30 years ago, except in Germany, where I'm from. So probiotics been used there for a long, long time.
Because back to that Pandas, which has this strep infection, which requires antibiotics, and in fact, whenever anybody has antibiotics, what length of time what would be the regime for probiotics? Like if you were taking 3 antibiotics a day for 7 to 10 days, Should you be taking probiotics while you're taking the antibiotics?
Yeah. So,
What's the regime?
it's a good question because, when you're taking antibiotics, you're obviously going to kill some of those probiotics. But when you're taking antibiotics, you're changing your gut flora completely. And I think if you give some good bacteria during that time, it is still a good idea. And you should continue that probably for 3 weeks afterwards.
So once you've stopped the course of antibiotics,
I would continue for 3 weeks because it takes a while to replenish the gut with good bacteria. What I always recommend is once the kids are old enough to eat, to give them fermented foods. That's really your natural way of getting probiotics, apart from eating dirt.
Yeah, which a lot of kids do.
A lot of kids do, and if it's clean dirt,
Yes, good.
if there's such a thing, if there's no lead in it and no arsenic and no pesticides, it's actually good for their gut flora. And the wonderful Maya Shetreat-Klein, a pediatrician from New York, is coming to the Mind Forum, and she is going to present her book, The Dirt Cure, which is all about that, about eating dirt, basically.
Because we've become so preoccupied with... We have this adversarial approach to bacteria. We have for 100 years, but now it's gone to the crazy part where everything is antibacterial, killing 99% of the... that to some degree could be part of what's going on with our allergies, couldn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That is a big problem, that people disinfect too much,
Yeah.
One thing is that even if you disinfect your kitchen, those really bad bacteria come back within half an hour. So you're not really disinfecting your kitchen anyway. But we are living in an environment that is too clean for our immune system. Children who grow up on farms, who grow up with dogs who are quite dirty, but cuddly, have a better immune system. They have a lower risk of getting allergies. So it's really important to expose kids to good germs, Of course, you don't want to expose your child to, any terrible, to salmonella or things like that, But the other actually interesting thing is, we used to talk just about the microbiome in the gut, as the microbiome is all the bacteria growing in our gut. We now realize it's not just bacteria. We probably have about 500 different species of bacteria in our gut that are fighting all for survival, and all have their roles to play in our immune system. But we also have lots of different viruses and even parasites that have evolved with us and that have an effect on our immune system. So there are some kind of weird treatments out there now that I just heard about at a conference in the States, where children who with really severe allergies, for example, are given some worm eggs from a beetle that can't grow, they can't reproduce in humans, but they just dampen down the immune system enough that these kids overcome their allergies. It sounds very weird, and I'm not sure many people would be willing to take worm eggs. But the other thing is also a lot of research on probiotics and allergies, food allergies. At Stanford University, they're giving children lactobacillus rhamnosus and tiny, tiny amounts of the food they're allergic to, for example, peanut. And then they slowly increase the amount of peanuts, and the children can eat it. And after a year or two, they're no longer allergic. So I think that's a fantastic area of research. I'm really looking forward to what
they're even talking about, they even talk about fecal, implants, isn't it? So taking feces from healthy individuals and implanting it into the colon of not so healthy and getting some positive results there. So I think we're heading into a whole new area of...
Yeah, fecal transplants are now the standard of care for older people with Clostridia infections in the hospital.
Wow.
Because these people would die, if an older person has a Clostridia infection, which you usually get after having had too many antibiotics, because all your good gut flora is destroyed, and the Clostridia are so sturdy, they survive anything.
Yeah.
So there's no antibiotic that works anymore, sometimes. And then the only thing that works is actually giving them a fecal transplant. And there is a doctor in Sydney who even does it for people with Crohn's disease, inflammatory bowel disease. And he has done research to show that those patients are doing very, very well.
Yeah, and he's been doing it for a long time. I think I know who you're talking about, Thomas Brody, isn't it?
Brody, that's right,
that's
yeah,
the guy,
yeah.
Well, that'd be an interesting discussion to have too. On to some of the mental health issues, because you mentioned ADHD, and that's an incredible statistic. 1 in 10 kids with ADHD and the autism as well. There are some common themes, though, that run through them. You mentioned vitamin D, and actually when I go down to the beach and I look at people wrapping their child up in, I mean, the best vitamin D still, what is it, the sun?
Yeah, I mean, we are supposed to get our vitamin D from the sunshine. And whenever I post something on my Facebook page about how, vitamin D deficiency is rampant and we should give vitamin D to children, especially in the winter, people say, but it should be natural. And I totally agree. It should be. But if you look at it, we have evolved at the equator where, all year round you have the same intensity of sunshine, quite intense. And we evolved there, a long time ago, and used to live with wearing clothes. So there was a lot of sun exposure and we were outdoors all day. And when you look at how we live today, we live far away from the equator where the sun is just not strong enough in the winter to produce vitamin D in our skin. And we spend most of our time indoors and we wear clothes when we go outside. Now, I do agree that we have to protect our children from sunburn. I mean, the sun here is too strong and we have a very, very high rate of skin cancer from children being sunburned as children. Yeah, so that's really a big risk factor. So we have to make sure that doesn't happen. But we also need to get some sunshine. And I always say, usually before 10 a.m., after 4 or 5 p.m., the sun isn't strong enough anymore to burn your skin. You can get a UV meter at any, you can buy it online or at the at a shop, but also you can get an app on your phone that tells you how strong the UV is, how long you need to stay in the sun, at whatever time to get enough sunshine to make vitamin D.
Yeah.
I think that's fantastic.
Yes,
a very useful app.
Yeah.
So vitamin D is incredibly important. If you have low in vitamin D, you get more infections, you get more allergies, more asthma, more eczema, and
more cancer, more other cancers.
Cancer, yes, absolutely. Autoimmune diseases,
So ironic,
MS.
isn't it? I mean, let's stay out of the sun to protect us from skin cancer. And yes, the skin cancer rates have gone down, but in the process, all these other things that rely on vitamin D have gone through the roof.
Yeah, if you look at the European countries that are as far away from the equator as we are, just to the north rather than the south, they have public health policy to give all children, at least in the first 2 years, vitamin D as a drop or as a tablet, and it's a daily dose. So I think that's really important to remember that you shouldn't, once in a while there's a study that comes out that says vitamin D doesn't help, doesn't work. And when you look at the study, usually it's either a much too small dose that just wouldn't make any difference. If you give someone who's vitamin D deficient 400 units a day, that's just not going to touch it. Or they're giving it once a month or once a year even. They do studies where they give older people huge injections of vitamin D once a year, and that's just not your natural. It's like eating once a year a huge amount and then hoping that the rest of the year will be healthy. It's just not going to happen.
What's a normal figure for, because people don't get their vitamin D levels checked in their blood tests. And I remember doing another program on this very subject and had never had my vitamin D levels checked. Well, I went and got them checked and I was clearly vitamin D deficient.
Wow.
Very, 30 my
God.
So the normal rating, to put a figure on it, is what? Somewhere between 40 and what's the figures?
No. So below 50 is deficient.
Okay.
Below 80 is insufficient. Okay. And the optimal is about 120. So if you look at the Maasai who live in Africa near the equator without wearing too many clothes and spending most of the time outside, the way we evolved, their level is about 120 to 150. And that's a really good level. Now, when I check almost every one of my patients, I check their vitamin D level because I think it is so incredibly important to know, because you don't want to overdose. And at the end of summer, which is right now, we're now at the end of March, your vitamin D level should be about 150 naturally.
150.
If you've spent enough time outdoors, and the children I check now who do spend lots of time outdoors, and have a nice tan, they naturally, without taking any supplements, have a really good level.
Yeah.
But that's a minority. Most kids are already low now, and we know that whatever the level is now, from now on, it's going to go down, down, down every week.
I'm feeling weak. I'm just thinking.
Well, it's important for your bones too.
And actually,
your mood.
If you've had a diagnosis of cancer, it's even more important, isn't it?
Absolutely,
and that's. So, golly, 120, my 30 is a shocker. I mean, it's a wonder that I even can stand up and survive. But it was probably like that. What I reflected on it was I had this test done, never had it done before, and I'm sure it's been like that for 20 or 30 years because nothing else had changed.
Wow.
So that's really scary, and even more so to hear you say 120. But anyway, that's okay. So we can get the sun, we can get supplements. The supplements should be taken regularly, and they should be of sufficient dose to make a difference.
Yes, and I think especially in the winter, especially in pregnancy, especially while breastfeeding, that those are the most important times to really make sure you're taking vitamin D. In the summer, if you're healthy and you do spend time outside, you don't have to take a supplement. Yeah.
Because I've heard that vitamin D and thyroid hormone are the two ones that impact on almost every cell in the body.
Yeah.
So absolutely critical. Wow. You mentioned vitamin D. We've mentioned... so there are some other common themes in problems of these mental health issues. You've mentioned vitamin D as one. You mentioned the gut microbiome as another. What are some other issues that people should be looking out for?
Well, I think another really important one is environmental toxins. So what I do when I see a child with a new diagnosis, let's say ADHD, I want to check that there isn't something that kind of mimics ADHD. For example, if you have lead in your blood, your behavior will be just like a child with ADHD, but in fact, what you have is lead poisoning. Same thing with mercury. And I check a lot of children, and I do get quite a few high levels back, especially if children eat a lot of fish, large fish, like catfish and kingfish and tuna, they can have very high mercury levels. And I have had patients who had a diagnosis of autism and had a sky-high level of mercury, and then I tested the rest of the family. They were all very high. They were all unwell. We got rid of the fish, and over a few months, the mercury levels went down, and the autism was gone. And with ADHD, the same with lead.
Yeah.
Then iron deficiency is very common nowadays for children to be iron deficient. And one of the reasons is that a lot of babies are being put on reflux medication. Reflux medication, which, if the baby is very irritable.
So we're talking about things like Nexium or
Losec,
Nexium, these
Zantac.
protein pump inhibitors at a young age.
Yeah, from a few weeks of age, because, the baby does cry and is upset, but most pediatricians realize that the number one reason for that is that they are sensitive to something the breastfeeding mother is eating, and usually it's dairy. If the mom takes dairy out of her diet, in 80% of cases, the baby's fine. There's no more crying, no more reflux, baby much more settled.
Yes.
But, it hasn't trickled down to everybody, so a lot of babies are still put on this medication, which reduces the acidity in their stomach. But that acidity in the stomach is actually needed to absorb iron and B12. And if you don't absorb iron B12, you become iron deficient, B12 deficient, which has an effect on your brain development.
Wow.
And in the longer term, kids with ADHD. So if a child is iron deficient and can't concentrate and is hyperactive, has trouble sleeping, you can just beautifully treat that by giving that child some iron rather than a medication that suppresses their hyperactivity. And they do fine.
Yeah.
So, so there are certain nutrients that kids can be low in that then show up as something that looks like ADHD. Now, ADHD, this diagnosis is anyway diagnosed. It's totally subjective.
Yes.
It's just
so
based...
there's no blood test to say, you've got ADHD.
There is no blood test. It's not like diabetes, where you say, look, your blood sugar is high, and not like that. So it's how does a child behave in two different settings. So let's say home and school. If they're hyperactive, they don't pay attention, they don't finish their work, they don't get along with the other kids, interrupt them, you get the diagnosis if you match enough of the points. And often they're put on a medication, but the real treatment should be looking at, do they have enough iron, enough zinc? Zinc is very, very important for brain processing and for your frustration tolerance and for concentration.
And zinc deficiency is very common.
Very common in Australia because our soils are so low.
Yeah. Soils are low in selenium, zinc, magnesium.
And iodine.
And iodine, which is one of the, which I learned so much from the people I talked to, Leila, but, another one was that iodine is the biggest deficiency in the world.
Yeah, and that affects children's development. That's the most preventable cause of developmental delays and intellectual disability, iodine deficiencies.
How should we be getting in this day and age our iodine?
Well, the recommendation actually is now that pregnant mothers take iodine as a supplement during the whole pregnancy because the risk is so high that they're not getting it from their diet. Yeah. There are foods that are high in iodine, for example, seaweed. Yeah. And a lot of kids I know love to eat seaweed snacks. I don't understand why they're so expensive. You pay $5 for a tiny little box of seaweed.
Yeah.
So seaweed is a great source. You can get iodized salt, but you'd have to have a lot of salt to meet your iodine requirement. So I think eating that, and then for selenium, Brazil nuts are a really good source. So having a Brazil nut a day, for adults 3 Brazil nuts will meet your requirements. Wow. The other thing I was mentioning was the zinc. Zinc. If you want to check for yourself, look at your fingernails and see if you have white spots on your fingernails. If you have white spots, you're quite likely to be either zinc deficient or selenium deficient.
Okay.
With zinc, you usually get smaller little spots, and selenium larger spots. And a lot of the kids I see who come with a diagnosis of ADHD have those spots. And then I check the blood levels and it's low, and we give them zinc, and within a few weeks they start being less frustrated, more even, can concentrate better, all of those things. And one more nutrient that I think is very, very important is omega-3.
Wow.
So, and that is one actually that most pediatricians nowadays will give kids with a diagnosis of ADHD, a high dose omega-3 supplement that has EPA and DHA. Those are the two essential fatty acids that we can't really produce ourselves. Usually we get them from fish.
Yeah.
I am vegetarian, so I don't use fish. I use algae oil, which is where the fish get their omega-3 from. So they eat algae to get that. And it's a really much cleaner way of getting your omega-3 because you don't, the fish, as you said, are contaminated with mercury and PCB and dioxins. Yeah. So to get a clean fish oil, it has to be molecularly distilled. That makes it very expensive. Yeah. And now we have more and more brands that are producing algae oil. And there's also something you can check on your body. So if your child has on their upper outer arms very dry skin that feels a bit like sandpaper, that's often a sign that they don't have enough omega-3 in their body. And actually, hardly anybody has enough omega-3. I mean, they have done studies because we eat too many other fats that are not healthy, all those hydrogenated oils and baking. And
well, we've been told to by so many, authorities to stay away from animal fats and focus more on the vegetable oils, and the vegetable oils are higher in omega-6, aren't they? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I personally only use olive oil.
Yep.
That's definitely a healthy
That's
oil.
A good one. Yep.
Sometimes I use a bit of coconut oil, but I used to have more of it, but now with the new studies, I'm not eating it by the teaspoon anymore.
Okay.
Not that I ever did, but I think olive oil is really the best. And I eat fresh nuts and seeds, and they're healthy.
Yeah.
They not only give you good oils, but they also give you magnesium, which is really important to be calm and relaxed and happy. But then you really need the omega-3. So some people say, oh, I just want to have flaxseed. That's okay, but you would have to actually do a test on yourself, either a genetic test or a biochemical test, to see how much of that flaxseed you convert into the DHA and EPA, the essential fatty acids, because some people are just not very good at that. So they would have to drink like a liter of flaxseed oil to make enough.
Yeah.
So
is a vegetarian, is there a likelihood of a higher copper issue in vegetarians than zinc? Is that an issue or no?
Not really. So the issue with zinc and copper is that they're a bit like a seesaw. So when the zinc is low, the copper goes high, and that's not good because the low zinc makes you easily frustrated, and the high copper makes you explosive. And that's kind of the typical child that comes to my clinic, really on edge and then explodes. And then if you give zinc, the copper comes down nicely just by giving enough zinc. And I haven't seen that vegetarian kids are higher in copper.
It must be so interesting in your clinic compared to, because I imagine there are some doctors that will look at this child and try to work out what medication will balance their neurology, their behaviour out. And you're looking at it and going, just wonder what nutrients there are. And people don't realise that there is such a strong connection between what we're eating and the behaviour.
Absolutely. It's a huge area of research now. For example, also just if you look at food, additives in food are clearly causing hyperactive behavior in some children, not in all of them. And so, like, for example, the color 102, the orange, in some lollies and drinks, and 202, the preservative, can make children who are not even children with a diagnosis of ADHD, without the diagnosis, makes them hyperactive if they have that. They've done studies where they have taken two groups of children and they kind of did a party scenario, birthday party, and one group got the 102 and 202 in their drink, and the other one got a drink that looked the same, tasted the same, but didn't have those additives in it. And within an hour, the kids in the additive group were wild, uncoordinated, fighting, and the others were playing happily and cooperatively.
Yeah.
So we know that that's happening, and a lot of parents are aware of that now and cut out the additives out of their diet. That's always my very, very first recommendation.
Yeah.
Just get rid of the additives. You don't need those. They're not good for you. They don't do anything for you. They just make the food look more enticing so that you'll buy it.
Yes.
But it's not good for you.
Now, you are also a lactation specialist, and you've already mentioned that, some things there. I think the other thing that a lot of mothers, families, parents aren't aware of is that when the child's response is one of reflux, that it's so often related to what the mother's eating, and that can change. So, now, you mentioned dairy as being a problem. Are there other foods that mothers should be looking out for that are commonly causing problems in lactation?
Well, I really don't like mothers to restrict themselves too much. I have some moms who come and they're already eating only like 3 foods because they think they were told so many different kinds of foods by different people that may be a problem, that they just don't eat anything anymore. But in general, I would say look at your family and see if you yourself, the father of the baby, or anyone in the family has sensitivities to food. The more common ones would be the common allergens, so egg, soy, wheat, corn, nuts. But they may not be a problem, We used to be big on not eating cabbage and, foods that could make the baby bloated. But I don't really see that much. I think if the baby has a good gut flora, and then really it is usually foods, and dairy in particular, it's that we are not evolved to drink the milk from a different species, So babies' immune systems are not equipped to deal with cow's milk protein. Some are okay, Some children have, especially if you come from, I don't know, Denmark or Norway, you kind of have, those people from there have kind of adjusted genetically to living near with cattle and drinking milk. But a lot of us are not. And so I would say dairy is really the number one. And if you take that out and then do a few things for your baby, like holding them upright a lot. We don't hold our babies enough anymore, I think. I love it when I go for a walk in Bondi and see, the babies in the front packs,
and
the moms and dads carrying them. It's so wonderful or just holding them, and not having them lying flat on a stroller. And even at home, I always had a sling and I had my babies in the sling and I walked around and did all the things I needed to do.
Yeah.
And they were sleeping in there, and then they were breastfeeding in there, and
well,
then
they've just
looked
spent
out.
their whole life up to that point, pretty close in that position.
Yeah,
so.
I love that the practice in Bali. They don't let the babies touch the floor for the first 6 months.
Yeah.
So they're always held by someone. I think that's so wonderful.
Yeah. I once read a book called The Continuum Concept.
Oh, I love that book.
Me too. We're going to have a word with my wife about that because she wasn't so crazy about it. I got, anyway, so that's a whole other program. Listen, if we were going to reflect now on and give our listener some hints, they've got a young child or they've got children and they're wanting to, ensure that they're at the best of health. What what would be 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 hints? Things
Okay,
you could
so my short list of getting your child on the path of optimal health is number one, that you give them real food. Okay, so that you eat lots of vegetables. If you look at the plate, it should be half filled with vegetables, a quarter should be your starchy foods, and a quarter should be your protein. And the less meat, the better. In the long run and in the short run. So that's number one, real food, whole foods. Number two would be to get enough sleep. I think we forget about how important sleep is. There is no way that a child can concentrate or be happy or have a healthy immune system if they are sleep deprived. So we really, really need to look at that. And one of the things that we do far too much is have the children play with screens. And the color of the screen, the blue color, actually interferes with the production of melatonin. When you look at that blue screen, it hit the blue color, the blue light hits your retina, the back of your eyes, and stops you from producing the hormone melatonin, which you need to produce to fall asleep. So we need to make sure kids sleep enough and don't spend too much time on screens. And then avoiding environmental toxins. I am actually just sending out a newsletter, I think this weekend, to everyone, and anyone can sign up to it on my website or look on my blog. And that has a checklist on what you can do to reduce toxins in your child's environment. And that's really a step-by-step. I mean, simple things like taking your shoes off when you come into the house.
I've heard
because
that
whenever
said
you
so
come in,
often.
your shoes will have pesticides on the soles. They have all kinds of bad things on them. So that's a really simple one. And getting rid of all the chemical cleaners. Just get rid of them. Whatever you use to clean your house, traces of that will be found in your food. So do you really want to eat a little bit of some horrible chemical that you use to clean your windows? No, you don't. And a study that just came out a week or two ago showed that if you use a spray cleaner, it is as bad for you as if you smoked a pack of cigarettes.
Wow.
So we really should get rid of this. The WHO, the World Health Organization, recommended after that study to get rid of spray cleaners. So, number one, food. Number two, sleep. Number three, environmental toxins. And number four, I would say, is a really healthy lifestyle. So lots of time spent outdoors, lots of time spent active and in green environments. So even for ADHD, there's now a treatment that is called green time. So where the children just spend time in green spaces. And it calms them down, they concentrate better, they're more creative after a walk in the woods or a play on the playground that's surrounded by green. So really, that's very, very important. So I think those four things would be my basis for good health. And they're not that difficult to do. I mean, it does take a bit of time if you are not on that path already, but it's not that difficult. Just really looking back at how did we grow up, how did our parents grow up, and why were they so much healthier in a way? I mean, not all of them, of course, but I think that's just back to the basics.
Yeah, that's good. Listen, just finally, I just want to take a step back from your specialty as a paediatrician and lactation specialist and ask you this question. What do you think people, and you've covered some of it already, but what do you think people's biggest challenge is today on their health journey in our modern world, as they work through life, What do you think the biggest challenge is?
The biggest challenge, well, I think, is eating real food, really, because it makes such a huge difference. I mean, you are bombarded with advertisements for foods that are processed. If you go to the supermarket, 90% of the food you can buy there is processed, full of additives. Is just, as I mentioned at the beginning, a mixture of processed white flour and some unhealthy oil and dairy and sugar. So if you just buy the food that the advertisement tells you to buy, you're going to eat unhealthy food, and that will cause all kinds of health problems. We do know that, blood pressure, heart disease, cancer, autoimmune diseases, all of those have to do with diet to some degree, And I think stress is the other big one, I mean, not just adults are stressed, children are stressed already, and it is probably because the parents are stressed, I mean, I see it so often that if parents are very, very stressed, and I mean, they have good reasons to be stressed, life is expensive, you work hard, there may be, you may have to take care of your parents with Alzheimer's at the same time as you have little children, this kind of sandwich generation. There's so many reasons to be stressed, and I think we really need to find a better life-work balance, get more community around us so that we can somehow reduce the stress, and not get our children to already start on that path of being stressed from very young, allowing them to play, allowing them some just free time, and maybe even to be bored from time to time. We know that when children are bored, they actually come up with really creative ways of entertaining themselves. And we schedule them nowadays so much, they have so much homework, and then they go to all their after-school activities. And of course we want them to be well-rounded human beings and have had some music and some exercise and all these different things that we want to provide for them after school. But the most important thing for a young child is to play. That's how they learn, and that's how they de-stress, so we need to give them that time. And maybe for adults, it's the same thing. Maybe they need to play more.
Yeah, fantastic. Leila, thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to have links, of course, to your webpage, and we look forward to talking again.
Thank you, Ron. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
We will, of course, have those links to Dr. Leila Masson's website and her wonderful book, Children's Health A to Z, which incidentally is also available as an ebook. Leila and I we're very proud to support and present at this annual Mind Forum. It's the 10th annual Mind Forum in May 2018 at the University of New South Wales here in Sydney. Now, MIND, MINDD, stands for Metabolic, Immunological, Neurological, Digestive and Developmental Conditions, which the forum always has two streams, one for health practitioners and the other for the public, and they are always sold-out events. But now, in case and they're always full of great information. So this year, this is the first time, if you missed out on the public stream, it's also available online, and we'll have links to that online streaming, which recordings of the forum are great to watch. Now, if you've enjoyed this, or for that matter, any of our other podcasts, spread the word, share it with friends and family. It's an important message about personal empowerment, taking control of your health and your environment. The two are inseparable, and above all, building resilience, physical, mental, and emotional resilience. So with that in mind, until next week, this is Dr. Ron Ehrlich. Be well. This podcast provides general information and discussion about medicine, health, and related subjects. The content is not intended and should not be construed as medical advice or as a substitute for care by a qualified medical practitioner. If you or any other person has a medical concern, he or she should consult with an appropriately qualified medical practitioner. Guests who speak in this podcast express their own opinions, experiences, and conclusions.